Today's lesson is 7th grade 3.5. The objective: students will solve proportions using ratio tables as well as cross products. The standards covered in this lesson are 7RP2B and 7RP2D. The page numbers out of the hardcover book are pages 124 through 127, and out of the practice journal, pages 71 through 74. Okay, today we're going to be working with proportions. Now in lesson 4, we worked with proportions also, but in this lesson, we're going to be working with more advanced proportions. So we're going to review really quickly how we solve proportions in lesson 4. In solving proportions, there's a couple different ways that you can go through and solve for a missing portion. One of them is to go through and identify what was done to the first set or the first ratio to get the second ratio. So for example, we might look at this and say, what did they do to 12 to get it to turn into 6? And if you look at that, well, let's see, 12 divided by 2 would give us 6. So the same concept can then be applied to the other part of the ratio. So we could just divide 10 by 2, or not 10, sorry, 5 by 2, and that would go ahead and give us 2.5. So here we just found out that y equals 2.5. Another method that you can use other than solving that way is what we call cross multiply and solve, or cross multiply and divide. So when we have that, I'm going to go ahead and write out our original ratio, which was 12 over 5. And then I have equal to 6 over y. And when we go through to solve this, we can use that process of cross multiply. So we're going to multiply where we have 2 diagonal. And then we're going to divide or solve in the last part. So right now, because we're just solving for a basic one variable, we're going to go ahead and use that cross multiply divide. So I'll go ahead and pull my calculator up here. So we're going to multiply where we have 2 diagonal, 6 times 5, which gives us 30. And then we're going to divide that by 12. And it should give us the same answer that we got above, and it did. So we just found out that y equals 2.5, and that was the same as what we had above. Okay, so those are the two different ways that we can go through and actually solve proportions. Sometimes it just depends on the proportion as to which one's easier to use. So the more you get used to understanding how to solve it, sometimes mentally solving, it might be easier to see what's happening to the first ratio to get that second set of numbers. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and practice another one here. So here's where I'm talking about it's more advanced. So instead of just doing whole numbers like we did in lesson 4, we're going to start working with decimal numbers. You're still going to use the same concept. Okay, we could go through and say, well, let's see, 2.4 times 3 would give us 72, so then times 3. Or the other method we can use is we can go through and do 7.2 times our bottom number over here of 1.8, and then divide by the third number of 2.4. It should give us the same number. So let's see, 7.2 times 1.8. And then we'll divide that by 2.4. And when we do that, we get 5.4 for K. We would have gotten the same thing if I would just went ahead and check this. Now that was something mentally I was able to do because I was thinking 24 and 72 and ignoring the decimals. Some people won't be able to do that. And that's where this cross multiply divide works 100% of the time. So if I just double check off of my mental calculation, 1.8 times 3 gives me still the 5.4. So we just found out that K equals 5.4. Okay, so this is just working the same concept that we did in lesson 4. It's just working with some more advanced numbers. This one, once again, is kind of like what we already did. So 9 times 3 would give us 3, or not times 3, divided by 3 would give us 3, or we can work it backwards. 3 times 3 would give us 9. So then 17 times 3 should give us the same thing. Or we can do our cross multiply, divide. So let's see, if I did the cross multiply divide, it'd be 9 times 17. Divide that by 3. And when I do that, I get 51. And 17 times 3 does give me 51. Okay, so here's one where it's a little more advanced. So I'm going to go ahead and have you work through this one. You can either use your cross multiply divide, which is probably going to be easier here just because there's not an easy number. It's a decimal number that they're working with between 10 and 8. So go ahead and work through this one and then check your answer in just a minute. You should have gotten K equals 5.6 for this one. Okay. And the last one here, we've got 9/10 is equal to D over 6.4. So go ahead and solve through that one. You should have gotten 5.76 on this one. D equals 5.76. So that's working with some proportions where they're just slightly a little more advanced. They're not perfect whole numbers. And using that cross multiply divide or cross multiply solve as you get older and start working with more complex problems. Okay, so here's another example of where we might work with proportions. So they might give us a graph. So here we have a graph. It says the toll due on a turnpike is proportional to the number of miles driven. How much does it cost to drive 150 miles? So here we have to actually pull our information off of our graph there. So the way that we need to understand is, first of all, we have to understand how to read this. So we've got some coordinate sets here that they're giving us, and we have to understand what those really mean. So here on this dot, the dot's right here, I kind of covered it up. I'm going to go ahead and work off of that one versus the 107.5, just because then I'm not working with the decimal. So off of this dot, I have to understand that if I go down from this dot, that is representing the distance in miles. So that 200 that I just drew that line to is my miles. So I'm working with miles, and it looks like dollars over here. So over here, this 15 is representing our dollars. So we've got cost per mile, miles per dollar. It doesn't really matter. We just need to make sure that we understand which is which. So I'm going to go ahead and do cost per mile. So I'm going to do my dollars on top. So 15 over my miles was 200. Okay, my third bit of information, I have to jump back into the story problem. How much does it cost to drive 150 miles? So once again, that was my dollars, and this was my miles, which I forgot to mark. So when I set up my proportion, I'm going to go ahead and set up so that I have the same units on the same level. So my 150 miles needs to be on the bottom where I have miles of my first one, so 150. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull my calculator back out, and we're going to do 150, my cross multiply divide, times 15, and then I'm going to divide that by 200. And I get $11.25. Now, that's not the only way to solve it. Somebody else might have said, well, how much am I paying per mile? And then they may have worked off of that. But when you've got a problem like this, you don't have to solve a unit rate. You can also set it up as a proportion. Had I set it up as like a unit rate, I would have figured out cost per mile. So $15 divided by 200 would have given me about 7.5 cents per mile. And then if I went 150 miles, so times 150, it's still going to give me the same answer. I love proportions because it's very visual. So you can set it up. The key thing is make sure that you're matching labels. All right, so let's try another one here. Okay, so we'll shrink that down out of the way. It says, how many servings provide 32.5 grams of protein? So once again, understanding how to read our graph. So if it doesn't matter which of these I choose, I'm going to go ahead and choose this one. So I've got a 4, 26, and my 4 is representing my servings. And if I go over on my dot, my 26, granted it's not on my thing, but it does tell me it's 26, a little above that 25 is my grams of protein. So if I do grams per serving. So my grams was 26 and my servings was 4. So that's just taking these two numbers and putting them in the right spots. And here's the bit of information that they're giving me for the first question. How many servings will 32.5 grams of protein? So since I'm doing my grams of protein on the top, that's where I'm going to put my third bit of information. And I need to figure out how many servings. So we're going to cross multiply, divide. So pull my calculator back out. 32.5 times 4. Divide that by 26. And we could have also figured out grams of protein per serving. So I just found out that it's going to be 5 servings here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and erase the second part of this. I'm going to keep my original ratio because it looks like we had a second question here. And our second question was, how many grams of protein will 7 servings provide? So this time they're just giving me the servings. So my servings was the bottom. So I'm going to put 7 there. And we're going to cross multiply, divide. So pull my calculator back out. And 7 times 26 divided by 4. And when I do that, I get 45.5 grams of protein for that second question. Okay, so that's understanding how to pull information off of your graph. It's just taking your coordinates, setting them up as a ratio, and just making sure that you're identifying in there what your top number is versus what your bottom number is. Okay, so let's try this one. It says, the distance traveled in feet is proportional to the number of seconds. Find the values of X, Y, and Z. So when I look at this, I know that it's set up in a table. This is how I prefer to look at it. I'm going to pull a little rectangle off here quick, just so I can cover up part of this. Okay, so when I look at this, I'm going to just focus on those 4 boxes. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm very visual, and so lots of information kind of confuses me. So I kind of want to focus on just exactly what I need. So really when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at it like this. 3 over 5 is equal to X over 65. So I'm looking at that table and transforming it in my head into actually ratios. So now if I'm going to go through and solve this, well, I'll pull my calculator back out, or I could say, what did they do to 5 to get 65? But I'm going to go ahead and do the cross multiply divide because it works 100% of the time. So 65 times 3, and then divide that by 5. Gives me 39. So I just found out that X is 39. Now I'm going to continue working in that manner to find out Y and Z. I'm just going to go ahead and move off to the side. And now instead of focusing on the first 2 boxes, I'm going to look at those 2 boxes. So now I've got 39 over 65 is equal to 15 over Y. So cross multiply, divide. So this one's going to be a little different because I'm going to go ahead and get probably a decimal number because I'm noticing that I can't do something to 15 to get 39, like a perfect number. So 15 times 65, divide that by 39. And when I do that, I just got 25. So it didn't give me a decimal number. It just wasn't an easy number for me to find. So I just found out that this one is 25. Okay, so now what I want you guys to do is solve for the last part, and that's go ahead and solve for Z. So I'm just going to cover up or erase that part. So now you're going to go ahead and solve for Z. And when you did that, when you solved for Z, you should have gotten, let me double check that. Uh, 2.1 for this. To double check, had in my head it was going to be a different number. So see, sometimes it's good to just kind of double check yourself. And notice, even myself as a teacher, I still double checked because I wasn't sure that that was the right answer. But when I got the same answer a second time, I felt very confident that it was a true answer. Okay, so that's basically working with proportions. Now what we're going to do is solve a couple proportions where it's involving an extra step. So remembering that when we work on cross multiplying and dividing, we're still going to do that, but what we're going to end up doing today is we're going to end up, or in this part of the lesson, is instead of just having a Y here, we're going to be adding a step in that. So we're still going to do that cross multiply divide. And the reason that I have this set up the way that I do is I want you to realize that when we worked early on cross products, the beginning of this chapter, we always found or knew that they were proportional when we found that the products were the same when we did cross products. So here, if I did my cross multiply or my cross products, well, 9 times 17, see, 9 times 17 is going to give me 153. And that's going to be equal to 3 times y, which is 3y. So I know we're probably not going to set them up this way, but this is what we're going to be doing, is we're going to be doing that cross multiply divide, only we're going to find out that we have to do one additional step. And like here, we're going to have to divide by 3 to get y by itself to find out what that y is. So 153 divided by 3 is going to give me 51. So I just found out that y equals 51. Now when I check my cross products, it's going to go ahead and give me the same answer of 153 for both of those. Okay, but we're going to change it up a little bit and have some different numbers in there, or numbers with letters. Okay, so here's our first one. So we're going to do our cross products. So we're going to still do that cross multiply, and then we're going to divide by the one that does not have the letter involved. So on here, I'm going to punch on my calculator 14 times 4 divided by 8. Okay, and that's going to give me what this has to equal. So I'm going to actually write this down here, k plus 3 equals, and when I do that cross multiply divide, I'm going to just write that answer behind that equal sign. So 14 times 4, divide that answer by 8, and when I do that, I get 7. So I just found out that the k plus 3 equals 7. So to get k by itself, minus 3, k equals 4. Most common made mistake. Kids will think that the answer of 7 is what k should be. But remember, it's the letter plus 3 equals that 7. So make sure that you're doing that second step, because that's the most common made mistake. Okay. Let's try this one. So same concept. We're going to cross multiply, divide. So I'm going to find out that 2x equals that cross multiplying divide. So 9 times 5 is 45 divided by 15 gives me 3. And if you need to use the calculator, you can do that. So now I have 2 times x equals 3. So to get x by itself, right now it's multiplying. So we're going to divide by 2. Divide by 2. X equals 3 divided by 2, which is 1.5. Whoops. Or 1.5. Okay. So same concept, still using that cross multiply divide, only now we're going to solve that final step. So this is where we start saying that cross multiply and solve. Okay, so now go ahead and try this one. And you can use your calculator to go through and start the process. Once you do your calculator part, remember it's 6c equals whatever you get. So you should have gotten 6c equals 36, and then divide by 6. Divide by 6, we just found out that c equals 6. Okay, so let's try one more. Okay, go ahead and do this one on your own. Remember, cross multiply where your letter or your variable is not involved. You should have gotten m equals 10 because the m plus 10 equaled the 20. So then you had to subtract 10. And last one. So go ahead and do this one and then check your work. Okay, we should have gotten z equals 15. Okay, don't forget that final step of isolating the variable. Okay, well that's it for this part of the lesson, so good luck. And just remember, when you've got more than one step, it's a cross multiply and then solve. So make sure that you're doing those final steps of adding and subtracting or multiplying and dividing to isolate that variable.